February 9, 2021, 4:47 a.m. Security personnel at Dubai Healthcare City's Pearl Tower find themselves confronting a scene that will shatter the medical district's reputation for excellence and discretion. On the roof of the 12-story facility, where helicopter pads serve the city's wealthiest patients, lies the body of a young woman in silk pajamas, her fall from the penthouse clinic 14 floors above leaving no possibility of survival. Blood spreads across white concrete in patterns that forensic investigators will later determine inconsistent with simple suicide. Her phone, found clutched in her hand with screen still illuminated, displays a draft email to UAE health authorities containing names, addresses, bank account numbers, and the opening line. "I can no longer stay silent about what Dr. Vikram Mehta has been doing to desperate women. The babies being sold, the surrogates disappearing, the records being falsified. I have proof of everything." Her name was Carmen Reyes. She was 29 years old, a registered nurse from Cavite province, and until approximately 4:15 a.m., she had been the long-term mistress, medical assistant, and increasingly reluctant accomplice to one of Dubai's most prominent fertility specialists. The email was never sent. But the attachments, 17 video files, 43 photographs, and a spreadsheet tracking 127 surrogate pregnancies over 4 years, were already backed up to a cloud server that her killer didn't know existed. Within 36 hours, that evidence would trigger the largest medical fraud investigation in UAE history, exposing an international surrogacy ring that had transformed desperate Filipino women into incubators for wealthy couples willing to pay $200,000 per baby, while the surrogates themselves received less than $15,000 and no legal protections whatsoever. But the investigation would also reveal something darker than the illegal surrogacy operation. A systematic pattern of surrogates who had entered Dr. Mehta's clinic pregnant and left empty-wombed with medical records claiming miscarriage or stillbirth. Their babies sold to different clients than originally contracted, their compensation withheld, and their attempts to seek justice blocked by visa systems that made them criminals the moment they accused their employer of wrongdoing. Carmen Reyes had discovered that the fertility clinic saving wealthy couples' dreams was built on a foundation of stolen children, forged documents, and women who disappeared into deportation or worse when they threatened exposure. Her decision to become whistleblower rather than accomplice would cost her life. But the evidence she compiled would ultimately free 19 women held in surrogacy detention, reunite 4 children with their biological mothers, and send Dr. Vikram Mehta to prison for crimes that luxury and medical credentials had shielded for years. Understanding how Carmen Reyes came to die on that rooftop requires understanding how a nursing graduate from one of Manila's poorest provinces became entangled with a fertility specialist, whose Hippocratic oath had been subordinated to profit margins measured in hundreds of thousands per transaction. Carmen was born on June 3, 1991, in Ternate, Cavite, a coastal municipality where fishing and farming provided subsistence rather than prosperity for families like hers. Her father, Eduardo, repaired boats for daily wages that fluctuated with weather and fishing seasons, earning perhaps 300 pesos on good days and nothing when typhoons kept boats harbored. Her mother, Rosa, sold fish in the public market, standing from 4 a.m. until noon in heat that drove away customers and amplified the smell that clung to her clothes and skin no matter how thoroughly she scrubbed. Carmen was the second of 6 children, occupying the middle position that often meant being overlooked in families stretched too thin across too many needs. But she distinguished herself early through academic performance that teachers recognized as exceptional even in schools where resources and expectations remained low. At 12, she was tutoring classmates for small fees that she saved in a coin bank shaped like a jeepney. At 15, she was working weekends at a local clinic, cleaning examination rooms and sterilizing equipment, while absorbing medical terminology and procedures through careful observation. At 17, she won a provincial scholarship to nursing school at Cavite State University, beating 200 other applicants through examination scores that reflected both intelligence and desperate determination to escape the economic limitations that had constrained her parents' generation. She graduated in 2013 with second honors, passed the nursing board examination with scores high enough to qualify for immediate hospital employment, and confronted the reality that Philippine nursing positions paid 12,000 pesos monthly, approximately $240 that couldn't support her own basic needs. much less contribute to the family obligations that Filipino culture expected of successful children. The overseas employment agencies that recruited outside Cavite State's campus, gates during graduation week promised salaries 5 times higher in Dubai, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. Carmen attended their presentations with hundreds of other new graduates, listening to success stories from alumni who had returned for brief holidays with gifts demonstrating the wealth gap between Philippine and Gulf nursing wages, calculating whether the risks of foreign employment justified the financial transformation it offered. The offer from Dubai Pearl Fertility Clinic came through a Manila recruitment agency in September 2014. $2,800 monthly to work as a nurse in a state-of-the-art facility specializing in IVF, surrogacy coordination, and reproductive medicine for international clientele. The contract emphasized the clinic's luxury amenities, its cutting-edge technology, and its position serving Dubai's wealthiest residents alongside medical tourists from across the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. What the contract didn't emphasize was that surrogacy coordination meant managing a pipeline of Filipino women recruited as gestational carriers, that international clientele included couples from countries where commercial surrogacy was illegal, and that the clinic's founder, Dr. Vikram Mehta, viewed reproductive medicine less as healing profession than as high-margin business opportunity in a regulatory environment that asked few questions about women's bodies being rented by the month. Carmen arrived in Dubai on November 15, 2014, her expectations shaped by recruitment agency promises that reality would immediately contradict. The clinic occupied the penthouse floors of Pearl Tower, its waiting rooms decorated with Italian leather furniture and abstract art, its examination rooms equipped with medical technology that cost more than Carmen's entire nursing education. Dr. Mehta himself seemed the embodiment of medical excellence, Oxford-educated, published in international journals, fluent in 5 languages, and possessed of the smooth confidence that came from treating patients who paid cash rather than navigating insurance bureaucracies. He welcomed Carmen warmly, praising her board examination scores and expressing confidence that she would thrive in an environment that rewarded competence and discretion in equal measure. The discretion requirement became clear during her first week, when Carmen was assigned to the clinic's 3rd floor, a space inaccessible to regular patients, secured by keycard access, where 12 Filipino women in various stages of pregnancy lived in accommodations that resembled hospital wards more than the luxury apartments the recruitment agency had described. These were the surrogates, women who had contracted to carry babies for wealthy couples unable or unwilling to sustain pregnancies themselves. They received basic medical care, adequate nutrition, and strict supervision that prevented them from leaving the facility without escort. Their passports were held by the clinic for safekeeping. Their visa status was tied to their continued pregnancy. Their communication with family was monitored to ensure they didn't disclose details about their living conditions or the financial arrangements that paid them $15,000 for 9 months of pregnancy, while the clinic charged intended parents $220,000 per successful birth. Carmen's initial duties involved routine prenatal care, blood pressure monitoring, vitamin administration, ultrasound assistance, and the kind of basic nursing work she had trained for. But she quickly recognized discrepancies between the medical care these women received and the standard protocols she'd learned in nursing school. Surrogates showing signs of preeclampsia or gestational diabetes received minimal intervention, with Dr. Mehta insisting that conditions resolve themselves or that early delivery was preferable to expensive hospitalization. Women expressing psychological distress about the pregnancies were given sedatives rather than counseling. Those attempting to contact family members without supervision found their phone privileges revoked. The surveillance and control Carmen witnessed resembled detention more than medical care, but her complaints to Dr. Mehta were dismissed with explanations that framed exploitation as protection. These women come from extreme poverty. Without our structure, they would squander their compensation and return home with nothing. We're providing opportunity they couldn't access otherwise. The justification contained enough truth to be difficult to refute. The surrogates were poor, some desperately so, women with children to feed, debts to repay, families dependent on the money that pregnancy could generate. Many had attempted traditional overseas employment as domestic workers or caregivers, only to encounter sexual harassment, wage theft, and working conditions that made surrogacy seem like better option despite its physical and emotional costs. They had signed contracts willingly, if willingness could exist in circumstances where refusing meant watching their own children go hungry. Carmen found herself trapped between her nursing ethics, which demanded she advocate for patient welfare, and the economic reality that these women's alternatives to surrogacy might be even worse. The compromise she made was providing the best care possible within a system she increasingly recognized as exploitative, while avoiding questions about the system's fundamental morality. Her relationship with Dr. Vikram Mehta began 6 months after her arrival, emerging from the kind of professional intimacy that develops between doctors and nurses working long hours in high-stakes medical situations. He was 44, married to a dermatologist who maintained her own successful practice, and seemed content with an arrangement that prioritized career over emotional intimacy. He presented himself as trapped in a loveless marriage maintained for social appearances and their 2 teenage children's stability. Carmen was 23, isolated in a foreign country, financially dependent on the clinic, and vulnerable to the attention of a sophisticated man who treated her as intellectual equal rather than subordinate employee. The affair followed predictable patterns: late-night conversations after difficult deliveries, dinners at his apartment justified as work discussions, physical intimacy that he framed as mutual attraction between consenting adults rather than the power imbalance it actually represented. Within a year, Carmen had moved from the nurse's shared accommodation to a 1-bedroom apartment near the clinic that Dr. Mehta paid for, her official salary supplemented by allowances that tripled her income and transformed her family's circumstances back in Cavite. Her parents renovated their house with a concrete 2nd floor. Her younger siblings enrolled in private schools. Her older brother started a fishing boat business with capital she provided. The financial transformation was everything Carmen had hoped overseas employment would achieve, but the cost was her increasing complicity in operations that her nursing training told her violated every ethical principle she'd learned. She was no longer just providing care to surrogates. She was recruiting them, processing their applications, managing their detention, and helping falsify medical records when outcomes didn't match what intended parents had paid for. The falsification began small, with minor adjustments to surrogates' medical histories to make them appear healthier and more suitable for pregnancy than they actually were. But it escalated as Dr. Mehta's operation expanded beyond legal and ethical boundaries that Carmen struggled to rationalize. She discovered that some surrogates were being implanted with embryos from different intended parents than their contracts specified, allowing Dr. Mehta to double-book pregnancies and maximize revenue when some couples canceled or one embryo transfer succeeded unexpectedly. She learned that surrogates who miscarried or delivered stillborn infants often had their compensation withheld entirely, with Dr. Mehta claiming the contracts only paid for successful live births despite language suggesting otherwise. Most disturbingly, she witnessed cases where healthy babies were reported to surrogates as stillborn or fatally deformed, then sold to different clients willing to pay premium prices for immediate infant availability rather than waiting through another pregnancy cycle. The breaking point came in September 2020, when Carmen attended the delivery of a surrogate named Melissa Cruz, a 24-year-old from Pampanga carrying twins for a German couple who had paid $340,000 for the double pregnancy. The delivery was complicated, with the first twin, a girl born healthy but the second twin, a boy showing signs of respiratory distress requiring immediate NICU care. Dr. Mehta made a decision in the delivery room that Carmen would later describe in her unfinished whistleblower testimony as the moment I realized I was working for a monster rather than a doctor. He declared both twins stillborn to the surrogate, who was heavily sedated and unable to see the infants, then reported only the healthy girl to the German couple while registering the boy under falsified documents that would allow him to be sold separately to a wealthy UAE national couple seeking a son. Carmen confronted Dr. Mehta immediately after the delivery, her voice shaking with rage as she demanded explanation for what she had witnessed. His response was chilling in its casual amorality. The German couple paid for one healthy child. That's what they're receiving. The boy's respiratory issues may resolve or may prove permanent. Why should I risk their satisfaction by giving them a defective product? The other couple has been waiting 2 years for a son. This solves everyone's problem. When Carmen insisted that Melissa deserved to know both babies had survived, that the biological parents had rights to both children they had paid to create, Dr. Maida's facade of collegiality evaporated. You will say nothing. Those twins officially don't exist. I haven't registered them yet. The surrogate signed away her rights. The intended parents will receive what I decide they receive. And you will remember that your visa, your apartment, and your family's new prosperity all depend on your continued discretion about operations you don't fully understand. The threat was explicit and comprehensive. Carmen's visa was sponsored by the clinic, making Dr. Maida's continued approval necessary for her legal residence in Dubai. Her income supported 6 family members whose lives had been transformed by her remittances. Her complicity in previous record falsifications made her vulnerable to criminal charges if she attempted to expose Dr. Maida without evidence that would protect her from being framed as the primary wrongdoer. She spent sleepless nights wrestling with impossible choices: remain silent and accept her role in a system stealing babies, or speak out and risk destroying both her life and her family's security. Her Catholic faith, dormant during years of moral compromise, resurged with devastating clarity about what conscience demanded despite consequences. Carmen began documenting everything in October 2020, using her administrative access to copy files that Dr. Maida assumed were secure. She photographed surrogacy contracts showing vast discrepancies between what intended parents paid and what surrogates received. She recorded videos of the third-floor detention facility where pregnant women lived under surveillance. She compiled the spreadsheet tracking 127 pregnancies over 4 years, noting which had resulted in reported failures, despite her knowledge that some of those babies had been born alive and sold to different clients. She backed everything to a cloud server accessible only through an email account Dr. Maida didn't know existed. And she began drafting the whistleblower report that would expose his operation to UAE health authorities, detailing not just the illegal surrogacy arrangements, but the baby trafficking that transformed reproductive medicine into a criminal enterprise. Dr. Maida discovered her investigation on February 8, 2021, when security software monitoring the clinic's network flagged unusual file access patterns from Carmen's account. He confronted her that evening in the penthouse office that doubled as his personal apartment during the long hours he spent managing his empire. The argument that followed, later reconstructed through testimony of staff members who heard portions through closed doors, cycled through the predictable stages of discovery: denial that crumbled under evidence, justifications that sounded hollow when spoken aloud, threats that escalated from professional to personal. Carmen refused to delete her files or abandon her whistleblowing. She had already seen too much, compromised too much of her integrity, contributed too much to operations she could no longer rationalize. "I became a nurse to help people," she reportedly said. "What we're doing here isn't medicine, it's trafficking, and I won't be part of it anymore." Dr. Maida's response revealed a man whose moral compass had been so thoroughly corrupted by profit and power that he couldn't comprehend principled resistance. "Everything I've built, everything your family has gained, all of it disappears if you send that report. The authorities will shut down the clinic. Intended parents will sue for breach of contract. Surrogates will be deported as illegal workers. You'll be charged as accomplice to every falsified record you helped create. Your nursing license will be revoked. Your family will lose the house, the business, everything. All to satisfy your sudden attack of conscience about women who knew exactly what they were signing up for and babies who are going to loving families regardless of who pays for them. Is your self-righteousness worth that cost?" Carmen's answer was the draft email still displayed on her phone when her body was found 14 hours later. She had written it during the confrontation, sitting in Dr. Maida's office using her phone because he had taken her laptop, detailing his threats as they occurred. The email's timestamp showed she had hit Save Draft at 11:47 p.m., approximately 1 minute before Dr. Maida's own phone records showed him making a call to a number registered to Hamza al-Nasser, a security consultant whose services included problems that required discretion rather than legal resolution. What happened between that phone call and Carmen's body being found on the rooftop remains subject to competing narratives. Dr. Maida claiming Carmen jumped in distress over guilt about her complicity. Forensic evidence suggesting she was pushed or thrown given the distance from the building edge where her body landed and the defensive wounds on her forearms. The investigation that followed Carmen's death exposed the inadequacy of Dubai's initial response to suspicious foreign worker deaths. The first police report classified it as probable suicide, noting her history of depression treatment. A prescription Dr. Mehta had written himself for anxiety medication, now conveniently cited as evidence of mental instability. Her body was processed for repatriation within 36 hours, faster than standard protocol, suggesting someone had expedited paperwork to prevent thorough examination. The clinic's security footage from the rooftop had mysteriously malfunctioned between 4:00 and 5:00 a.m., providing no visual record of how Carmen came to fall. Dr. Mehta provided a statement expressing devastation at his nurse's tragic decision to end her life, making no mention of their confrontation hours earlier or the investigation she had threatened to unleash. But Carmen had prepared for the possibility of her death with the same meticulous planning she had applied to documenting Dr. Mehta's crimes. Her cloud backup system was configured to automatically send access credentials to 3 recipients if she failed to log in for 24 consecutive hours. Her sister Ana in Manila, a journalist who had written about migrant worker abuses, and a Filipino lawyer who specialized in overseas worker advocacy. At 4:47 p.m. on February 10th, exactly 24 hours after her last login, all 3 received emails containing links to 17 videos, 43 photographs, Carmen's complete spreadsheet, and a cover letter that began, "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Dr. Vikram Mehta runs an illegal surrogacy and baby trafficking operation from Dubai Pearl Fertility Clinic. I have been his accomplice, and I can no longer live with that shame." The evidence attached documents everything. Please make sure the surrogates still detained are freed and the stolen babies are returned to their biological parents. And please make sure Dr. Mehta faces justice for what he's done. The evidence was overwhelming and immediately newsworthy. The journalist published Carmen's story within 48 hours, forcing UAE authorities to reopen the investigation under international scrutiny that made quiet dismissal impossible. Police raided the clinic on February 15th, finding 12 surrogates in third-floor detention, 6 of whom were past their delivery dates, but being held until intended parents could travel to Dubai for infant collection. Computer forensics recovered thousands of deleted files confirming Carmen's accusations about falsified records and double-booked pregnancies. Financial analysis traced $8.4 million in payments from intended parents over 4 years, contrasted with only $1.1 million paid to surrogates, a profit margin that demonstrated the exploitation's economic foundation. Most damning were the genetic testing results that confirmed 4 children currently living with families who believed they were biological or legally adopted offspring were actually stolen from surrogates who had been told their babies died at birth. Dr. Vikram Mehta's arrest came on February 22, 2021, at Dubai International Airport, where he was attempting to board a flight to Mumbai with $400,000 in cash and encrypted hard drives containing additional records he'd attempted to destroy. The charges were extensive: human trafficking, document fraud, medical malpractice, operating an illegal surrogacy business, and second-degree murder in Carmen's death based on forensic evidence showing her injuries inconsistent with suicide and witness testimony about their confrontation hours before her fall. His trial lasted 7 months and exposed systematic corruption extending beyond one clinic to include government officials who had accepted bribes to overlook surrogacy operations, hospital administrators who had falsified birth certificates, and an international network of recruiters who had trafficked desperate women into reproductive servitude. The verdict found Dr. Mehta guilty on all counts except first-degree murder, the court determining that while he likely caused Carmen's death, premeditation couldn't be proven beyond reasonable doubt. He was sentenced to 25 years imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after 15 years. His medical license was permanently revoked. His assets, including the clinic property and offshore accounts containing $12 million, were frozen pending restitution to victims. The facility itself was shuttered permanently, its equipment seized as evidence, and its luxury furnishings auctioned to fund compensation for the 19 surrogates identified as victims, and the 4 families whose children had been stolen through his baby-swapping scheme. The aftermath extended far beyond individual justice. Carmen's case became catalyst for UAE's first comprehensive surrogacy regulations, establishing legal frameworks that had previously existed only as unenforceable guidelines. The new laws required mandatory independent legal counsel for all surrogates, third-party escrow accounts ensuring surrogates received full compensation regardless of pregnancy outcomes, government monitoring of fertility clinics with authority to conduct unannounced inspections, criminal penalties for operating commercial surrogacy arrangements, and simplified pathways for surrogates to report abuse without risking visa cancellation. The reforms were imperfect, still favoring wealthy intended parents over poor surrogates, but they represented acknowledgement that previous regulatory absence had enabled systematic abuse. For Carmen's family, justice came wrapped in grief that no compensation could alleviate. The repatriation of her body, delayed for months by the investigation, finally occurred in September 2021. Her funeral in Ternate drew hundreds of overseas workers who saw in her death both warning and inspiration. Warning about the dangers of becoming entangled with employers whose wealth insulated them from accountability. Inspiration from her ultimate decision to prioritize conscience over security. Her sister Anna used compensation from the victims' fund to establish a resource center, providing legal advice and emergency assistance to Filipino workers facing exploitation abroad. Her parents, devastated by losing the daughter whose sacrifices had transformed their lives, nevertheless spoke at migrant worker conferences about the price of overseas employment and the necessity of protecting vulnerable workers from predators who exploited their desperation. The 19 surrogates freed from Dr. Mehta's clinic faced complicated futures. Most returned to the Philippines with partial compensation. The escrow account established during the trial ensured they received the $12,000.15,000 originally promised, though nothing approaching the $180,000.220,000 intended parents had paid. Their experiences with pregnancy, detention, and the trauma of learning that the medical care they'd received was designed to maximize profit rather than ensure their well-being left psychological scars that limited compensation couldn't address. Several became advocates themselves, speaking publicly about surrogacy's darker realities and pushing for regulations that would prevent future women from experiencing the exploitation they had survived. Others retreated into privacy, wanting only to forget the months they had spent as incubators in a system that treated their bodies as rental property and their consent as commodity purchased by contract. The 4 children whose true parentage was revealed faced perhaps the most complicated outcomes. Court battles stretched across years as biological mothers sought custody from families who had been raising children they genuinely believed were legally theirs. The German couple who had paid $340,000 for twins, but received only one after Dr. Mehta sold their sons, separately fought both to keep the daughter they'd been raising for 6 months and to gain custody of the son they'd never met, complicating Melissa Cruz's attempts to reclaim both children. In 2 cases, judges awarded custody to biological mothers with visitation rights for the families who had paid for and bonded with the infants. In 2 others, the children remained with paying parents, while biological mothers received substantial compensation and agreed adoption arrangements. None of the outcomes satisfied anyone completely, demonstrating how Dr. Mehta's crimes created tragedies that legal systems struggled to adequately address. Carmen Reyes's legacy extends beyond the specific reforms her evidence prompted or the individual lives her whistleblowing affected. She became symbol of the impossible position that migrant workers occupy when they discover employer criminality, complicit through economic necessity, endangered by speaking out, damned by silence and speech alike. Her story demonstrates how systems of exploitation depend on workers' fear of losing the precarious security that foreign employment provides, how visa sponsorship arrangements transform employers into sovereigns with near-absolute power over their employees' legal existence, and how wealthy professionals can operate criminal enterprises for years when they target populations that regulatory systems have been designed to ignore rather than protect. Her death also reveals the profound moral injuries that result from prolonged complicity in systems that workers recognize as unjust but feel powerless to change. Carmen spent 5 years providing medical care to women she knew were being exploited, falsifying records she understood were fraudulent, participating in operations her nursing ethics condemned. The psychological cost of that complicity manifested in the depression medication that Dr. Maida later cynically cited as evidence of suicidal tendencies, in the sleepless nights her roommates reported, in the increasing social isolation that friends attributed to her deepening crisis of conscience. Her decision to finally become whistleblower represented moral courage, certainly, but also desperate attempt to salvage some fragment of integrity from years of compromise. That it cost her life demonstrates how systems of exploitation punish those who refuse to remain complicit, how speaking truth becomes suicidal act when power is sufficiently threatened. Today, nearly 4 years after Carmen's death, the Pearl Tower where she died has been converted to conventional medical offices, its fertility clinic past erased from official history, if not from the memories of those who lived it. Dr. Vikram Maida sits in Alawir Central Prison, his appeals exhausted, his name synonymous with the medical profession's capacity for corruption when profit eclipses ethics. The surrogates he exploited have scattered, some back to the Philippines, others to new overseas employment that they pray will prove less traumatic. A few still in Dubai building lives from the compensation they received. The babies whose parentage he manipulated are growing up in families that love them, largely ignorant of the circumstances that brought them into the world and the woman who died trying to make their stolen births matter. But in one small corner of Ternate, Cavite, in a house built with money that Carmen's Dubai nursing wages provided, her family maintains a shrine that honors her memory with bittersweet pride. Her nursing diploma hangs beside her photograph, both draped with sampagita flowers that her mother refreshes weekly. The rosary she carried throughout her years in Dubai rests in a glass case, returned with her personal effects, fingerprints still visible on beads worn smooth by prayers offered in circumstances that tested faith beyond endurance. And on the wall beside her shrine, framed carefully, hangs a printout of the email she drafted in those final hours. The whistleblower report that cost her life but freed 19 women, reclaimed 4 stolen children, and exposed systematic abuses that regulations had previously ignored. Her family cannot read most of it, their English insufficient for legal terminology and medical jargon. But they understand its essential meaning. Their daughter chose conscience over survival, chose others' freedom over her own security, chose to become witness even when testimony would prove fatal. Carmen Reyes came to Dubai believing nursing skills and hard work would provide the prosperity her family needed. She died because she refused to remain complicit in a system that transformed reproductive medicine into baby trafficking, that treated poor women's bodies as commercial resources, that prioritized wealthy clients' desires over basic human dignity. Her death changed laws, imprisoned a criminal, and provided justice for women who had despaired of receiving it. But it also demonstrated that individual courage, while necessary and admirable, cannot fully compensate for systemic failures that make exploitation profitable and whistleblowing deadly. Carmen's legacy demands more than remembering her sacrifice. It requires building systems where workers can report employer criminality without risking deportation, where medical ethics are enforced regardless of patient's wealth or nationality, where desperate poverty doesn't force women to rent their wombs to survive, and where speaking truth doesn't require martyrdom. Until those systemic changes occur, Carmen's story will remain not just memorial to one woman's courage, but indictment of global economic arrangements that require some people's exploitation to sustain others' prosperity, that treat certain bodies as tradable commodities, and that punish those who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable cost of their own survival.